started in about 10 to 15 seconds or so as our viewers join us on LinkedIn or on YouTube, and all of our attendees trickle in. So if you can just give us about a minute or so, we'll just get started. And for those of you who are just joining us, this is supposed to be an interactive discussion. Swarupji has agreed to be very candid, honest, and in my conversations with him previously, he has been very open about his experience. We will not be using, in the interest of time, because I do want to get through as many questions as possible. Please do use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Would love if you would use your name, your first name or last name. But if you if your question is particularly interesting, feel free to be anonymous. We will still ask those very interesting questions on that. And I am going to make sure that, as we go through, although we have asked our CII members and council members to submit their first 4 or 5 questions. So I'll try to go through those first. And then we'll try to organically move from there. If at any time you feel that you want to have a follow-up question, please do let me know. We'll be very happy to also ask Swarupji. But very warm welcome. Thank you for doing this. It is very rare to see a civil servant who's willing to have these sort of candid, open-ended conversations on an open platform such as this. Many of your colleagues and such have always been, worked with CII very closely. And, one of the things that we've learned over time is that a proper discretion and understanding is something that is very crucial to make sure that common objectives of our nation are met. But I think, and you've done so in your books. I think very rarely, and for all those who have not had a chance to read Sir's books, please do grab a copy. Almost all the books that I usually read are, very, very, whitewashed, very sanitized. No one should feel hurt. No one should feel bad. The most incredible stories become a little bit, downplayed. And I think one of the rare things that Swarupji has done is in his book has been very outright and forthcoming. In my prior conversations with him, I learned that he has maintained a diary, which has enabled him also to recollect and bring very, very accurate information. And so although this conversation will be more general and we'll cover some of the things that Swarupji has covered in his book, but I highly recommend people to buy the book so they can read firsthand exactly what those specific stories are. He's a great storyteller, and it's not a dry work at all. Most books on ethics and such pontificate on frameworks. I am guilty of the same. But I think by bringing in his life story, by bringing in real incidents, real ethical dilemmas that he had to struggle with during his time at all levels of the government. Sir has been starting from the Uttar Pradesh cadre. He rose to the chief minister's office, held several very key posts there, then went on to the central government, was instrumental in transforming a whole number of ministries, first starting off ranging from our exports commissioner and such, and then finally ending up as the education secretary. And he has, to his credit, glowing recommendations from almost all the government and politicians he has worked with, and they have particularly remarked on his great attention to details and high integrity. But with that, sir, I will jump right in. I think we have an incredibly large audience joining. Okay, fantastic. So I think our numbers speak for themselves. And for those who are joining us on LinkedIn and such, please give your questions in the comments section. I will be sure to ask those as well. Brilliant, sir. I'm going to dive right in. We don't have much time. So rather than doing a lengthy opening remarks, let's just start with the basic things. So the big question on ethics. You worked in Uttar Pradesh through multiple governments, some of them who earned a reputation of corruption that became internationally renowned, forget about in India. As a civil servant who was an insider, as someone who was ordered many times to go and do things that were perhaps off pale, and you knew what those were, how did you survive? How did you thrive? And how did you keep yourself away when so many other colleagues of yours got swept up in that entire, I wouldn't say moral decline, but certainly slippery slope, sir?
Very soon, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's heartening to be amidst CII. I've always loved interacting with the members of CII well in service and even thereafter. So thank you very much for inviting me here. Very soon in my career, I was discovering what I wanted in the career and in life. And that to me is the most critical part. What do you expect of others? What do you expect of the politician? What do you expect of the service? Once you are clear about your expectations, then the road becomes very clear in your mind. And as I write in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, I think the principal dilemma is in terms of deciding what do you want in life. Once you've decided upon that, then the dilemma ceases to exist. Sorry to say, dilemmas do exist, but dilemmas cease to exist in your mind because you have that clarity of thought as to what you're looking for. For example, if you want to disagree with something which is illegal or which is wrong, as you mentioned, and which is patently wrong, you start understanding the consequences of the two decisions that you will take. One is complying with that illegal decision, the other is not complying with the illegal decision. It is that dilemma, the moment you resolve it, then the problem ceases to exist. I must confess that in the first few years of my career, I was pretty rattled in the sense of deciding where should I go, what should I do. But gradually as I went along, I discovered that once you have that clarity in your mind, that you don't expect anything out of turn from anybody. So my fundamental bottom line was, I never went to any politician for anything personal. Officially, yes, but nothing personal. The politician gradually came to know that I'm not expecting anything of him. I was sure that I was not expecting anything from him. The moment you do that, I think the problems get sorted out. Problem arises with a lot of us is that we expect something from the politician. And in order to do that, you have to pay a price. Now, as I have written in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, either way, you have to pay a price. You lead a particular path. It's not that you want to lead an ethical path and there are no problems. There are indeed problems. And it would be absolutely wrong to say that if you lead an unethical path, you will have a smooth ride. You're aware that 2 chief secretaries of state of UP were sent behind the bars. So I'm not, again, in my book, I don't say you should do this or you should do that. What I say in my book is what I did, and I enjoy doing it. So long as I enjoy doing it, I did it. That's why I did it.
I think, but I'd love to understand that. It sounds so easy to say this, right? Follow the right path, don't ask for personal favors, But and you mentioned in your book many a time. But can you just give us a couple of examples? And when personal favors, you didn't seek them, and they were thrust upon you. That as a bureaucrat, as a secretary, these favors, though are your right, but then that slippery slope starts.
No, I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate that it is not very easy. I may say it easily now, but it's not easy. But if you start enjoying the fruits of what you think is right, then it becomes easier. Let me give you a couple of examples from 2 different times. I had just got into the service. This is the year 1984, and I describe it in a chapter in my book, when the assassination of Mrs. Indira Gandhi happened. All hell seems to have broken loose. I was posted as subdivision magistrate in a district called Hardoi, close to Lucknow. And, people from a particular party were burning shops of minority community. And this was being led by a very powerful MLA of the ruling party. Now, the dilemma before me was, at that point in time, I now would have no problem. At that point in time, I had a problem. What should I do? Should I take action against him? Because no one even wanted to mention his name, that he's a troublemaker. I finally decided to make out an NSA case against him. Unthinkable. And I sent it to the district magistrate, who was the deciding authority. Now, this got to be known, and this MLA was after my life. He went to Lucknow. I was summoned to Lucknow. A very senior officer asked me to withdraw my report. Again, a dilemma for me. I said, why should I withdraw a report? The decision-making authority, the district magistrate. So I was politely transferred out of Hardoi. Now, at that point in time, I must confess that I felt hurt. I thought that I was doing the right thing, and I have been penalized. But over a period of time, I realized that transfer for a civil servant is like death. It is irrelevant because it is inevitable and it's going to happen. Why worry about it? And the moment you start understanding this nuance, then life becomes easy. Fast forward to another 7-8 years when I was district magistrate Lakhimpur Kheri. A similar situation. Babri Masjid agitation was happening. A member of a president of the ruling party of the district wanted to take out a funeral procession of a person who had been murdered. Now that would have created havoc in the city. So I tried to speak to him, tried to convince him. He didn't agree. So I had him arrested and he was put behind the bars. It is unthinkable arresting the president of a ruling party. Sure enough, late in the evening at around 10:30, the chief minister rang me up. He said, you have incarcerated my president. The conversation was in Hindi. So I explained to him why I did it. He asked me, "Aap chhod nahi sakte unko?" A very powerful chief minister. All chief ministers are powerful. He was also very powerful. "Aap chhod nahi sakte?" मैंने कहा साहब उचित नहीं होगा. Then he asked me, कोई और तरीका है? Then I told him, why don't you speak to him? It is your government. If there is a riot here, your government will get a bad name. So with that, he appeared fairly disgusted and he put the phone down. So I was mentally prepared to get transferred, as was the case 8 years ago. Next morning, I got to know that this gentleman, has agreed not to take out the funeral procession. So I released him. And after 2 months, the chief minister awarded me as one of the finest district magistrates. Now the situation was exactly the same in both. And I was gradually discovering the importance of karmanne vadikaraste mahafalechu kadachana. You do your job, what you do deem fit, and then be prepared for whatever consequences, because I had absolutely no control over consequences. Now I say that very easily now. At that point in time, it was not easy. There were difficult decisions to take. There's a price to be paid. So I had a daughter who was about 3 months old when I was transferred. And I didn't know what to do, didn't know people. But my rewards came differently. Though I was not hankering for rewards. These rewards were great. Thousands of people came to see me off at Hardoi station with tears in their eyes because they thought I was doing a good job and I was undone by it. It didn't really matter to me subsequently, but on that day, I felt, so to say, justified in doing what I did. So right through my career, I kept getting this, what I call them Bharat Ratnas. And there are many incidents narrated in my book that gave you the kick to sustain yourself. Now, again, it's for an individual to decide whether money gives him the kick, whether sense of achievement gives him the kick, whether sense of satisfaction gives him the kick. That's very personal to an individual. And my advice to my colleagues has always been, then don't crib. You take a call. What do you want to make money? Please make money. Because I don't think there's any other service in the world which enables you to make a lot of money yet thrive. I have, in the last chapter of my book is written, if I were to be born again, I'd like to be an IAS officer all over. Why? Because there's no service in the world that gives you enormous opportunity to serve the poor. If you're honest, you can survive. If you're dishonest, you can thrive. If you're efficient, you can do well. If you're inefficient, and I jokingly say, which service in the world makes you Secretary Government of India if you're efficient, and you have a chance of becoming Cabinet Secretary of India if you're inefficient? There can't be a better service than this. So that's what gets you going.
So, but you had mentioned one example. I think this is in your book only. Where when you had arrived at the CM's office, it was understood that you were allowed to take private planes to go to Delhi, and you were one of the few people who said no. Right? How did that A happen? And B, there were consequences of saying no. But how was it so easy for a lot of the colleagues, maybe some of them who went to jail, to say yes?
No, see, I'll tell you. I'll tell you why I said. I mean, by that time, I had reasonably matured. I had put in about 10, 12 years of service. And 10, 12 years, first 10, 12 years are pretty tough years of your. So what happens is, now I started somewhat evaluating the conveniences of the government. And I was fully conversant with the person who was offering this ride, a free ride, what are his antecedents and credentials. So aware of those, it's not that I would say no to every convenience. I use the car on occasions, I even misuse the car. It's not that I didn't, but one has to be aware, fully aware of the consequences of the action that you take and likely to follow. Now,
Everything has
consequences could be
strings.
anything. Sorry?
As what you're saying, G, is everything has strings attached. You need to know what those strings are.
Absolutely. So you have to have your antennas going. One thing you learn in the service is that your antennas are all the time up. It's not that you're distrusting anybody or doubting anybody. You're fully aware in making any decision. And that's what I tell my colleagues also. If you want to make money, do with your eyes and ears wide open. When you get kicked, then don't blame somebody else because you did it wide open. You can't say that I got kicked and so, some of the excuse could be others are making money, they're not being hauled up, I am being hauled up. This is nonsense, absolutely. You take a call because you are as an individual, you are responsible for the actions that you take.
Energy. So, one question, and this is, we already have a lot of questions. So I'm going to start going through some of them as well. One questions which have sort of come in from at least a lot of the business people. And you mentioned this in your book also. We moved from and you use the old Mughal terms. I'll use the English phrases. We've moved from happy gifting because nice work done to gifting to get work done to then extortion finally. And business people all across India, this is well documented, unfortunately, at all levels of government, even with the bureaucracy, are facing at some level or the other various extortion schemes. Now, and I'll elaborate on the gentleman's questions. He's asked it anonymously. One of the biggest problems what they face is that everyone says to a businessman, "Be clean," right? Then after he builds his business, there'll be one or two people who can, within a snap of their fingers, because the civil service is that powerful, can wrap up their entire businesses over 2 weeks. They force them to do some unethical action, pay some bribe, do something, and then to cover that he has to do another, and within 5 years, that poor chap who had started off with great intentions to be ethical, he is also thoroughly now in the soup and corrupted. How can we have a lot of young entrepreneurs also on this call, and their biggest worry is that they will get a phone call at some point, and their biggest worry is that it's very easy to say, I will not stand for corruption, I will not give a penny. But then when you have 50 employees whose jobs will be lost, if the company you built for 5 years is going to go away, if you promised a whole bunch of investors and the guy is only asking for a starting off a little bit money, uh, what are their options beyond just paying that person off?
See, it would be very difficult for me to suggest option to businesses. I'm a systems man. I can suggest systemic changes, and they are possible because I personally did some of them, wherein such situations cease to exist. Now, let me explain this to you further. Till about 10 years ago, I wouldn't have spoken this language, but I'm convinced that use of technology and transparency can dispense with it. Let us try and understand why it happens. It happens because of a physical interface between the common man or the businesses and the government servant. Imagine a situation if this is dispensed with. If there's no physical interface at all, I can guarantee that 70 to 80% of these practices will go. Let me further illustrate this. There is a chapter in my book where I talk about the project monitoring group. Now that's slightly different from the question that you raised, but that will explain partly what I'm trying to do. In 2013, almost all the scams had broken out, Commonwealth Games scams, gold scams, and nothing was moving in the government. So I was picked up by the then government to head a project monitoring group in the cabinet secretariat to fast track projects above 1,000 crore each project. At a time when all scams are breaking down. Why? Because I was told by the cabinet secretary and subsequently by the then finance minister that no one is deciding because everyone is apprehending that there will be a problem. So my solution then was, and I'll extend it later on to what can be done now. My solution then was, I'm prepared to join, but cabinet secretariat is a very secretive organization. I'd like to make everything transparent. The cabinet secretary did not understand when I told him this, because in cabinet secretariat, Even a normal letter is said in the sealed cover. And as a part of cabinet secretariat, I was talking of transparency. And when I explained to him, he almost threw a fit. I told him, sir, we'll not have a paper or file in our office. Why? I said, sir, we'll keep it totally transparent. How can you keep transparent? What we did was that if any industry which had an investment of more than 1,000 crore had a problem with any ministry, now problem is where the money changes hands, no? It's stuck. Lot of money is speed money in government. There are other sorts of money. I can give a full lecture on how to handle corruption, but I'm limiting myself to this. So what they did was, any industry with an investment of more than 1,000 crore in a project could go to that portal and mention the problem, also indicate the ministry where it was pending. This problem automatically went to their designated joint secretary, who was mandated to put his comment on the portal. Now it is happening without any paper or anything. Then I used to have tripartite discussions. And in those tripartite discussions, the concerned ministry joint secretary used to be there, the industry used to be there. And my approach was very simple. I used to tell the joint secretary, take a decision, reject it, with reasons, accept it. To cut a long story short, the longer story is in my book. In 15 months, we cleared projects worth 5 lakh crores. It was unprecedented. So people ask me, how did you manage it in this environment? Very simple. No matter how inefficient I am, to the public, I'd like to appear to be efficient. It applies to both government and private. No one wants to appear to be corrupt or sitting on files. Fortunately, so far society has stuck on to that. And imagine one cabinet minister lost her job because she was sitting on files worth 53,000 crores. So what did technology do? It expedited processes. Now, I'm not saying technology will solve all your problems. A brilliant effort is being made, which I wrote very recently in Haryana, where they are trying to digitize all the processes of the government, all. And they have looked at 500 such processes, which includes every interface of a common man in the government, birth certificate, land records, and they're going to track each application. The moment it gets to be known to the world, where is the application sitting, for how much time is it sitting, corruption levels will come down dramatically. So to me, the solution to corruption today is eliminating as much physical interface between government officials and the private, and using technology and transparency to bring it through. You give me specific cases, I can sit with specific departments and tell them how it can be done. But the tragedy is that I did not have, I'll just take a minute to complete.
No, please go ahead. I was just about to ask that.
In coal and education and in PMG, we didn't have a file of paper. Now, Prime Minister keeps emphasizing this point in every meeting, that technology is the way forward. But I'm unable to understand why our ministry is still doing with files and papers. Why are processes being done on files and papers? Why can't they be done technologically and transparently without file or paper? Why can't the process be made totally transparent for an entrepreneur to know ye kahan baiti hai? In fact, in one of the discussions at a higher level, I said, let's stop talking about Make in India. Let's stop talking about making business easy. Actually, let's make it easy. How can we make it easy? By letting the businesses to feel free, feel easy, not to run from pillar to post. And this is possible today in the digital world. People are talking about artificial intelligence. I recently wrote, why should you talk about artificial when the real intelligence is available to use technology? We are not using existing technologies to the hilt. And we are talking about artificial technology because it's sexy. Everyone likes that, no? Talk about artificial technology. First thing, get every ministry to digitize their files and paper without failure in next 3 months. It can be done. I'm saying because we did it. Why can't we digitize files and papers? If I move a paper in the government, I should know where the paper is sitting. Right now, they are talking of file tracking. No, I'm telling you, digitize everything. Technology is there. NIC has a software. It's a very good program that they run. You can do it, but we don't want to do it because I lose my power if I become transparent. That's the problem.
So now that's something which I wanted to talk. One of the stories, your first early brush with technology, and if the audience will give me a little bit leeway, I'll spend a minute on to do a paraphrased version of the story. But please, the full version is in the book, and you should read it. But essentially, sir, had a posting in which his office was responsible for the land record systems. And in that time, they had a system where if you request a land record, there was a series of stenotypists or copyists who would manually copy the record from the government storage by hand. then they would, then the second person would confirm that this has been copied, and then it would be given to the thing. Now, at that time, photocopy machines had just come in, and sir said, you know what, let's just put a photocopy machine. And suddenly he had a large number of people coming in saying, oh, job losses, technology will lose jobs, this, that, the Luddite thing. And I think it became very clear in the book. Obviously, these people were not there to protect jobs. They were there to protect the corrupt system that allowed manipulation of land records. So, I mean, you mentioned this story, and I won't get into it, but you know, uh, uh, part part of why we haven't been digitalizing. You mentioned the loss of power. Uh, is this pervasive? Is this the major reason why we are not seeing all this full processing systems? There is that people are afraid that with transparency, all the small money leaks that happen, the extortion, the speed money would go away. Is that the thing that is stopping it the most?
I, in a recently written article, I have tried to analyze the reasons for this not happening. One, of course, is the lethargy. We are basically conservative in nature. It's not for any other reason. कौन इस बवाल में फंसे यार, ये कौन लाए? I mean, people, when I switched from coal to education, people ask me, sir, why are you doing it? It's going on very well. आप unnecessarily कर रहे हैं. Why mend it when it's not broke? So I used to tell them, no, it's broken. You don't realize it. The outsider suffers. You don't suffer on it's being broken. So one is lethargy. The second, of course, is the sense of power that I have. Your ignorance is my power. Because if you are aware, then my power will certainly go. Of course, third, of course, is the corruption part. Second is pure power. Because, I remember, I think I've written this in my book also in another chapter. One of my predecessors, when I streamlined everything, they said, तुमने बेवकूफी का काम किया. I said, why? अब तुम्हारे पास कोई आएगा ही नहीं काम कराने. उसका अपने आप हो जाएगा काम. Now, there is the point that he's making. I feel powerful when people come to meet me. I remember this is not there in my book, when I became export commissioner, almost every foreign car was standing outside my office. When I left my office 2 years down the line, 2.5 years down the line, there was only my Maruti 800 standing outside. There was no car because we had digitized everything. My boss made a very classic statement. He said, when chairman of CII went to meet him, the then president, and he was joking with him. He said, देखिए, आई एम श्योर आपको मेरी सूरत तो पसंद होगी नहीं, और मुझे भी आपकी सूरत बहुत अच्छी नहीं लगती, तो हम लोग क्यों अनावश्यक यहाँ मिलते हैं ऑफिस में? ऐसी जगह मिले जहाँ अच्छा लगे. यहाँ तो आपका काम अगर हम डिजिटली कर दे तो ऐसे. आई एम टॉकिंग ऑफ 1999. It was then that we experimented with using technology to do away with export licenses, import licenses, using it digitally. I'm so fascinated with technology, though I don't know much of technology. To me, it provides answers to many things. But unfortunately, we've gone artificial now. Everyone is talking of artificial intelligence. अरे भाई, real intelligence को तो इस्तेमाल करो. जो है पहले उसका इस्तेमाल करो. It's always nice to talk about future because again, it excites everybody. That's what economists do. Everyone does that. Everyone talks about the future. अरे भाई, जिस धरातल पर खड़े हो उसका भी तो करो कुछ. उसका कुछ नहीं. Artificial intelligence, make in India. वो देवोस में हो रहा है मेक इन इंडिया. I was used to wonder, भाई आप देवोस में क्या कर रहे हो? मेक इन इंडिया. Now again I tell you, I'm very clear in my mind. You are going to attract investment from abroad. Why should you go? Let the industry here go and tell कि बड़ा मजा आ रहा है, अभी आओ. हम जाके कह रहे हैं कि हमारा जलेबी. I jokingly used to say, यार हर हलवाई अपनी जलेबी को अच्छा बनाता है. अरे जो खा रहा है उससे तो पूछो यार कैसी जलेबी, उसके हिसाब से बनाओ जलेबी. आप तन लो मेक इन इंडिया को दनादन और शेर दहाड़ रहा है दनादन. कितने कदम चलाई भी तो देखो. No one wants to see. I don't want, because then I would require another tiger to start roaring. No, let us look at the brass tacks. The tragedy is that by talking of brass tacks, it won't hit headlines, and we become so enamored by hitting headlines and razzle and dazzle that we don't go into the nitty-gritties of it. So I would sit with the businesses. All my solutions, whether in coal, whether in PMG, anywhere, have come by sitting with businesses. By he knows where the shoe pinches. मैं अपना तीर तो चला लूं और बड़ा भाषण दे दूं. नहीं, let me understand from him. I may disagree with him, but ultimately I am the decision maker. Ultimately, he can't decide on my behalf. But why should I deprive myself of the wisdom of somebody who's actually suffering on account of my misdeeds? So that has to be approached, and I don't know why it doesn't happen.
So I won't say more. I think you've covered everything on that. And I think the problem, G, even, and to be honest, even our industry associations, all of us have the same issue. One of the things which I keep telling, at least internally to all of industry, is that since I have been involved in industry, and I was involved in a very, very young age, in my early teens, and I set up my first company. I said, I've been hearing at that time, we used to hear of Vision 2010, then Vision 2015, then Vision 2020, 25, Vision 30. Now people have directly jumped to Vision 2050. And
We are all romantics. We are all romantics. We like to live in a surreal world, and we create that world because it's so sexy. It's so enchanting.
20
You can
साल
escape.
बाद हम ये करेंगे.
But I am a great believer in dreaming. I'm a great believer. But your feet firmly on the ground. If
What
you
is
don't
your
put your
vision
feet on the
December
ground,
2020, for example, right?
and should somebody sit down and see that such and such thing was said on such and such date, what has happened now? If not, why isn't it happened? And then make it happen. When I joined coal sector, let me again digress. No one thought that coal sector could be set right, but they still talked in terms of getting 1 billion tons of coal. मैं कहता था भाई धरातल की वास्तविकता को देखते हुए समाधान निकालने का प्रयास करें और फिर ड्रीम भी करें साथ साथ. But then I'm a dream merchant, I can sell you any dream.
So we have one question which I'll take, which flows directly. And unfortunately, again, this is an anonymous question. And again, my apologies to the asker. I will paraphrase it, so I hope it's done correctly. The question essentially is asking is that, look, the common citizen, the common businessman, the common student of India, are influenced by emotions and lots of advertisements. Every political party of all sphere is advertising before elections. Incumbent, new person comes in, radio jingles, this, that, social media, WhatsApp forwards. As a bureaucracy, having seen the difference between what is advertised and what is done, how should a common citizen or a person be? Are there resources or places or systems or methods they can use to actually gauge if things have actually happened, or this is all razzle dazzle, which every political party does.
No, it's very simple. It's very simple. The most difficult assumed things are most simple ones. Why do I buy a Mercedes car? I buy a Mercedes car for my padosi to see. I mean, if you close your eyes, the back seat of Mercedes car is fairly uncomfortable. I've sat, so I know. The driving is very good, but जिसके पास Mercedes car है वो ड्राइवर चलाता है, वो खुद तो चलाता नहीं है, फिर भी Mercedes car खरीदता है. इसलिए क्योंकि most of us buy or consume things not for ourselves, but to show to others. That's the common human psychology. And all advertisement is based on not my requirement, but my perceived requirement of how to impress somebody else. कपड़े हैं, गाड़ी है, खाना है, not for yourself. The moment you start looking inwards, what is good for me, you start understanding. You don't have to be told कि कौन बेवकूफ बना रहा कौन. हम बेवकूफ बनने को तैयार हैं. I have been through that. I remember when I was in university, I was of good height and lean and thin. So I grew my hair thinking that I was looking like Amitabh Bachchan. I didn't look like his poonch even. But I thought, because that's the common psychology, that I wanted to not look like Anil Swarup, but like Amitabh Bachchan. So we all are romantics in that sense. And hence, the dream merchants get away with it because they're selling dreams. And I like dreams. I buy those dreams. The moment you start looking inwards at what is good for you, you will understand it. I don't think, not many people can easily cheat me. That's why I've been able to trust people.
But this is I know, and I'm going to extrapolate the point because I want to make sure that we get this question answered, right? So one, of course, is that the moment you look inwards rather than outwards, right? The moment you start forget about aspirations, you say what is actually happening, what is this, then you can see beyond that grifter dream merchants. And all politicians at the end of the day, even I would say all businessmen at the end of the day, are dream merchants. Otherwise,
have to be.
Otherwise, how do you lead people, right?
There's no harm in dreaming. Now, second to the ground reality part. To the ground reality part. Today, all information is available on the net. I don't want to see it. So, for example,
how would suppose? So I'm going to interrupt you there, G, because this is very, very important, right? I think the faith in media and its ability to report is at an all-time low around the world. India, to absolutely dead. What are some of the internet sources that you would trust to tell you what's happening?
Nothing. You don't have to even go to media. Take, for example, we announced wrongly that we'll produce 1 billion tons of coal. in 2015. I tried to hold back the minister. He disagreed. He announced it. Ask this question. It's there. You don't have to believe the media. These are facts on the ground, whether 1 billion ton has been produced or not. These are facts, and these you don't have to distrust anybody. No media reports are required. These are facts, verifiable facts on the net. You just type, was this announced, and you'll get to know it was announced. Just ask what is the current production period. Ask this next question is, why isn't there? You can ask any question and forget the media. I don't read newspapers, but I can verify facts on the net, because net mein facts mein. See, the problem is with opinions. Facts are not there, but we choose to study statistics in different manner. That's your choice. Again, I come to personal. Otherwise, facts are facts. Please go into the announcements made by all political parties. No media, anything. These are facts. You said this. What has happened is also available on the net. Now, thereafter, my personal disposition will come whether I want to believe it or not. So the problem is not with either facts or with anybody else. Problem is with me, because I choose not to look at facts. So the problem is not with the politician, because politician ka to job hi yahi hai ki dream bechna. But if I choose to buy those dreams, that's why I started with it. The fault is with me, not with him. I converse with a lot of people, and they tell me, ye tum galat keh rahe ho. Humne kaha, yaar, fact to fact hai na. To fact verify kar lo. Baki to opinion apna bana lo. So long as you don't selectively pick up those facts. Again, media doesn't come here. No one can mislead you. I tell you, no one can mislead me unless I want to get misled. It's very simple. We wrongly blame others for doing that. Look at the question here. There is a question here. I'm sorry for taking it, because it says here, what are your views on reducing excessive bureaucracy? Now, look at the prejudice of the question. You are assuming that bureaucracy is
no. In fact, before you answer that, there's another couple of questions which I want to combine and ask you.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a personal story, everybody. I got into an argument with a group of UK parliamentarians, right? And I told them that, look, the entire, what I call the I hyphen of India, the IAS, IRS, IFS, all thing there, plus judges, plus, all the gazetted officers, it's called, is not more than 10,000. And 10,000 is a stretch. I think IAS itself is less than 6,000. And they are doing 1.3 billion people, right? In comparison to UK, which is more than 100,000 plus of what their version of the gazetted officers are. And, all of them basically, you are a misinformed young man. We do not believe you, and go away. So then, Google Aya, check kiya, showed them, verified. They were in shock. And that how a small 10,000 number of gazetted officers plus is able to manage 1.3 billion. Now we have several questions. Since you took this up, Aditya, I want to combine them all. We have several questions here who are saying that, for example, India has which is true, has the lowest number of foreign officers per capita. Forget per capita, lowest number of foreign officers given the size and scope of a country than India. Singapore has more compared to India. Forget about China, US, which has, I think there was a joke that the US has more foreign officers in India than India has across the world. So there we have a lot of stuff where thing. On the other hand, we have a whole lot of person, including the biased question you picked up, because there's an implicit bias, as you were saying, that how do we bring the bureaucracy down? And then I have a third question, which I will also add to that. There's a notion of, I think the Prime Minister himself also said, maximum governance, minimum government. But if you bring down the number of IS officers, each one will become more powerful. So what is the right size of bureaucracy? Why have we been, on one hand, it seems that we have too many bureaucrats. One hand, we seem to have too little bureaucrats. What's happening here?
So I would try and explain this in a minute or two, but the details are there in a chapter in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, where I actually talk about what is the higher civil service. And I have proposed certain suggestions. In my limited understanding, the problem is not so much of quantity as of quality, of the nature of the civil service. And I've often said, you can outsource expertise, but you can't outsource attitude. Now, having said that, I explain in that chapter how to change this. And it is doable. I'm not dreaming. It's eminently doable. The problem with the present selection, which is absolutely above board, no one can doubt the credentials of UPSC. one of the finest organizations. But it is tasked with selecting people in a manner that you select bright individuals. That's where the problem is. My take is that they should select leaders. Today, you have tools to select leaders, and leadership and brilliance are two different things. So I did a random understanding of the toppers of the IAS, and almost 50% of them failed in the service. This is quite a huge number. I went through batches and saw how did they do in the service. It's shocking. The reason is very simple. Because what they test in the UPSC is your brilliance in writing in those 3 hours. How does that make you a leader? You know, some do become leader on their own. It's not that they don't. But there's no conscious effort to select leaders. They are selecting brilliant individuals. Then they train them as brilliant individuals in the academy, because I go there very regularly. Their brilliance is further honed. Yes, they have to be brilliant, but leadership entails different sets of traits and qualities. They are neither selected that way nor trained that way. Then third, there is no mentorship in the IS. I do it voluntarily. I mentor hundreds of IS officers, but there's no institutional mentorship. So the moment an IS officer gets kicked somewhere, he gives up and says, "Bhaad mein jaye. Ab jo main theek samajh raha hu, wo karunga."
So pause here. This is something which I want our viewers to understand very interestingly, right? What does not having a mentor mean, right? It means that an IS officer who has goes to a district, right? And IS officers in India are given large responsibilities very quickly. That is one of the hallmarks of the civil service, that you are hired, training, and suddenly you are now in charge of a big responsibility, right? 3 years into the job, right, goes to a district, has the same problems that every other IS officer has faced since time eternal, either in that district or similar, but he doesn't have anybody to call.
Yes, that's true. There is
While the
no, see,
politicians have multiple mentors who they can call to understand how to
I
work
have
with back
not, I have
officers.
not been a politician, so I know, I would assume they would have. It's a very informal arrangement. If you know somebody, you will talk. But I would believe, as is there in the private sector, there has to be, I mean, now they're working on it. I've been pushing very hard. So if DOPT did come out with something, hopefully it will hone further. We have to have mentors. Because see, in any organization, be it IS or any other organization, 10% are incorrigibles to either side. They're either good, bad, nothing will change them. 80% is the floating population, is the fence sitter. We keep losing them. You know, the reason why I wrote Ethical Dilemmas of Civil Servant was precisely this. Because I used to address officers who just joined the service. Then after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I used to address them. And I discovered a lot of cynicism getting into as they went up the ladder. They started blaming the surroundings and the systems and the politicians. And my book is basically telling these officers that if anybody has to be blamed, it is you, not the system. Because look at a large number of IS officers who've done brilliantly in these set of circumstances. You are looking at the wrong person. You're looking at those that failed. Unfortunately, some of those that have written, I won't name them, about the civil service have also quoted only officers who have failed. But there are equal number of officers who succeeded. Now, that's where the mentor becomes important. The mentor shows him, yes, there have been failures. Try and understand why have they failed. But in these very set of circumstances, there are successes. Every week, I'm writing a column on making it happen. And I pick up an incident of an IS officer or a police officer or a forest officer on how they made things happen despite the problems. Now, the mentor, what does mentor do? Mentor says, yes, you are in trouble. But you look at this guy, how he's done it. He puts him across to that guy, has a chat with him, may not solve his problem, but he lends him his shoulder, lends him here. It makes a world of a difference. I've been through that. I was fortunate to run into a mentor or two when I ran into problems in the beginning, and I found it very helpful, but that's very accidental and informal. So my view is it has to be institutionalized. So starting with the initial question that you said, I don't think quantity is a major problem. Yes, I can't put a number and say I have so many, but whatever you have the right quality. We have not really
put a number, what it would be? Would it be 6,000?
I have not thought about the number that would be,
Yeah.
but I do agree that a lot of ministries can be wound up. In fact, as Secretary Cole, when I started as Secretary Cole, I used to spend my nights in the office. At the end of 2 years, I had only 45 minutes of work. So I went twice to PMO to advise them, why don't you wind up Coal Ministry and make it a part of Mines Ministry as it was in the 60s? You could do that. They didn't do it. I can't understand why do you have a separate ministry for coal and steel and mines? They could be under one minister with one secretary. If the secretary is worth his salt, he'll have no problem in handling these three ministries. But we can talk of less governance or whatever, less government and more governance. But I don't think a single ministry has been wound up. Why don't we wind up? We have to rationalize this. And as somebody rightly said, the infrastructure set of ministries, why can't be under a single minister so that there's a better coordination between them? As at some point in time, power and coal were in the same minister, why can't that be done? It helps. It helped because we had a much better coordination with the power ministry. Much of the problems of the power ministry we could understand and sort it out. And that is why within 2 years, we came to a situation from acute shortage of coal to thinking in terms of exporting coal to Bangladesh. Because you had that coordination. That's in Government of India, unlike in the state government, in Government of India, the cabinet secretary does not have the overriding power of secretaries, unlike the chief secretary in the state. So who coordinates? So sab apne apne umpire bana ke khade hue jate usme. I think one of the finest things that the current prime minister did was to constitute these group of secretaries to interact informally. And learning from that, I started my own informal group of social sector as education secretary. And for the first time in the history of this country, we issued joint letters by two secretaries and old age problems sorted out. So we have to break these silos, which Prime Minister talks about quite often, rightly so, that these silos need to be broken. So it's not a question of numbers. It's a question of how it operates. How do you get it going?
Dhanji, I'm going to pick up two controversial questions. The first one, one of the ethical dilemmas, and the gentleman wants to understand this. We have political dynasties, right? And a lot of people say that this is one of the big problems India has because you have systemic corruption that goes families, families, families. Now there is a new version of this, which is the civil service dynasty. Where
Which
you have
certainly
the
civil
civil
service
service dynasty.
dynasty. Okay.
Right, so you have one person there, so one IAS officer married to an IRS officer whose father is a judge, who's where they have done a capture of all the various ministries, and then those families become untouchable because everybody is in every pocket there, so nobody wants to disturb any one of them or complain against anyone because they fear the retaliation. We also now have multiple generation of IS things where the parent is at maybe at the secretary, cabinet secretary level, but a junior officer has come in 4 5 years, but no one wants to touch him because they're worried they will face the ire of the parent or the in-laws and such. So the question the gentleman is asking: should nepotism be banned in the IS? That only one member of a family can be IS. You can't have multiple family members apart from maybe marriage, but you can't have these multiple generations of IS officers coming in, or that where they have a conflict of interest, where you have multiple family members in very very senior posts. Is that a
I was,
solution? If
yeah,
not, what's the solution?
I was, as you were asking the question, I was going through the cadre list, and I can tell the gentleman there's not even 5% of such cases. Not even 5. 5% is also an exaggeration. Not even 5%. Very rarely do you find such occasions now. But if two persons are capable of getting into the service through a mechanism that is devised by UPSC, where there is no favor or anything, why shouldn't we allow them? That is one. Number two, I've spent 38 years in my service. Not once did I come across this sort of nepotism. Much worse is the connect that some bureaucrats develop with politicians. The bureaucratic connect is virtually meaning. I mean, there are few instances. I can pick up one or two instances in court here, but that's an exception. But by and large, the connect is more not based on relations, or not based on relations with the person as a brother or a father-in-law. No, the connect that develops on the basis of caste in some of these states, that has nothing to do with. So they are much more insidious things that are happening in the civil service. This is absolutely, virtually, first of all, non-existent. And then wherever they are there, I don't think there is any sort of nepotism going on. Random one or two cases, pick up phone and talk to some guy.
Maybe
Please accommodate him. It's not even worth discussing. There are much more serious issues.
So, one thing, and this is based on a conversation, a lot of people says, a lot of so-called, and my apologies for using the word so-called, but people who are said to be honest officers, carry the badge of being transferred. कि देखो, I've been transferred 10, 20 times, and I keep getting transferred. And the old Bollywood movie, the very honest police officer or the very honest IS officer carries his resignation paper in the pocket. Moment he's asked to do something that he disagrees with, resign, transfer kar do mujhe. Uh, is that the solution? That if all officers were ready to resign at a moment's notice, the moment a
This
politician
is
asks them, or does
no,
that?
this is very unfortunate. I have a full chapter in my book handling this issue, and I come to the conclusion in that chapter. The job of the IS officer is to deliver on the ground. Honesty is a given. Honesty is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. That is one. Number two, number of officers that I come across think that they are the only honest people going around. The rest of the world is dishonest, and that's where the problem begins. I also had a problem with politicians to begin with, because when I joined the service, I was under the impression that all politicians are corrupt, they are doing wrong things. When I entered the service, I was of that impression. But gradually I discovered, and again I have mentioned a large number of politicians in my book, some outstanding politicians. They come from the same zoo or ajaib ghar from which we come. So they reflect the same aspirations of the society as we are. Marginal difference here and there. There are very bad politicians, they're very good politicians. They're very bad civil servants, they're very good civil servants. We can continue to argue with the numbers, but they are there. So it is wrong to say that politicians are always wrong and you carry something in the pocket. That is number two. Number three is very important. We must understand, and I keep telling my colleagues, the difference between compromise and accommodation. You should never compromise on a principle or something against law. But you must understand the limitation of a politician. Again, right through my book, there are a number of incidents where I was able to convince politician to do something which I wanted him to do. There were other occasions where I couldn't convince him and he did what he wanted. But there were occasions where I said I would get transferred on one or two occasions. That depends on your conviction at that point in time. But you can't keep fighting with every politician. And I see that happening in some of the civil servants. They put it as a badge of honor. And some of them flaunt it and say, I have been transferred so many times. Is that a honor? Is a badge of honor to be displayed? You must understand that the politician also has his limitations. I mean, I don't recall having done anything wrong, but I have recalled in accommodating a politician, and I have given that in my book, number of instances where I said something, he overruled me. So be it. I don't fight with him where he overruled me. In one case, I was fairly upset, but upset because one IS officer had to resign. But then you have to live with it. You learn from it. Next instance, similar situation arises. It's there in my book. I am able to convince the minister into doing what I asked him to do. You win some, you lose some. You can't have, it's not my way or highway. I mean, you are a civil servant. Ultimate decision maker is the politician. But as I keep saying, never do anything illegal. I mean, I've had my fights with powers that be. I mean, when I thought it was illegal. Then you transfer me, it's fine. But at the drop of the hat, any disagreement, you say I'm prepared to get transferred, that's not done.
So one more controversial question has come up. India has had a policy of reservation in all parts of society, including in the IS. And I'm not going to go into, of course, the question is obviously biased, but I'm going to paraphrase it in this way. How has that impacted the IAS, both in terms of the perception of people? Have those people who have entered in through the reservation system, in your perception? Obviously, there is no.
I mean, I would suggest some of you to read the book. There's a full chapter on.
No, I think this is.
And let me explain this to you also. I see reservation is a social necessity. I will not go into the details of it. But I have my take on the manner in which reservation is happening. My contention is it further dividing the society or creating a further hiatus, or it is settling? So some people don't agree with me. My suggestion is that, and the question that you asked earlier, why should generations keep getting this reservation benefit? One generation benefit gone, next generation should not get benefit, because that's how you are able to spread the benefit of reservation. We are not spreading the benefit. And the question that you asked earlier applies more to reservation. of reservation being cornered by those that have already benefited. So son of an IS officer stands a better chance of getting to the IS than a son of
The
a non-IS
creamy layer
officer.
problem, which has
Absolutely.
been
So
put.
you are creating that, and I see that in the service, that people who have enjoyed the benefit in one generation stand a greater chance because they have greater opportunities of making it to the IS. That is doing a lot of disservice to the reservation concept. I agree with the reservation part, but the manner in which it is being implemented, I don't think it's either serving the concerned caste, or is it serving the social interest, or is it serving efficiency in bureaucracy? I think that something needs to be done. Of course, there are other suggestions also in my book.
See, one of the big issues which you felt, and we talked about this initially when you started. You know, there's always political pressure to take a decision, and in that political pressure, you have had to deal with it all your life. There are some IS officers who do better at it. There are some IS officers who do worse at it. Obviously, in our discussions, we talked about how we can change that to having proper mentorship, having informal networks of people to understand how these things work and such. But could you share a few examples of people who of politicians who went above and beyond to put pressure, and how were you able to deal with it?
See, my entire book is about interface with politicians. And there are occasions where politicians overruled me, they agreed with me. But I must narrate a very hilarious incident in the beginning, which had political implications, but I butted in. This was when I was, after my stint as district magistrate Lakhimpur Kheri, I came to Lucknow as special secretary to Mr. Kalyan Singh, who was the chief minister then, and I was also a director of information and public relations. So as a part of my duty, I used to go every morning to discuss with him what was published in the newspaper. On this particular morning, when I reached his residence, the chief secretary and the DGP were already there, and they were having a very heated, or not heated conversation. The chief minister was very upset on a particular issue. So I stood there and I listened to what was going on. And the chief minister was upset because in a by-election meeting, he was supposed to address 7 meetings and he was not fully fit. So he was agitating, why have they fixed 7 meetings? And I can't do these 7 meetings, and you cancel those 2 meetings. And both the chief secretary and DGP were vehemently agreeing, nodding their head, yes, sir, aap kaise karenge, aapki tabiyat theek nahi hai. So I couldn't hold myself. I debated for a while, and then I couldn't hold myself. And then I told the chief minister, sir, I was district magistrate a few months ago. And when a chief minister comes to the district, there's a lot of preparatory work. There's a lot of excitement. People anticipate your visit. So my suggestion is, even if you go for a minute, just fold your hands, say hello, don't speak anything, but I would suggest that you should go. The moment I completed my sentence, he looked at me very annoyed. He said, "Aap samajhte hain main ja sakta hu?" So I said, "Sir, mera kaam tha, aapko main apni raay de दूं." And as I was talking, my chief secretary started nudging me to keep quiet strongly. Shut up, shut up. But I kept on saying, I said what I had to say. Now there was a pin drop silence for 15 seconds after that. And then the chief minister turns towards me and tells me, "Anil ji, aap theek kehte hain." The moment he said that, that nudging stopped forthwith. And the same chief secretary and DGP said, "Haan sir, bilkul theek kehta hai." Now, why I'm telling that? The point is, I said what I had to say on that particular occasion because I thought it was correct. I could have been overruled. And, I've questioned myself on the book. Was it appropriate of me to give this advice? I need not have given that advice. It was basically a political matter. But I did it. It happened. There were other instances where, for example, a chief minister rang me up after a good meeting. He didn't ring me up. His special secretary rang me up and said that 3 BDOs should be suspended. So I said, why should they be suspended? The chief minister was very happy. BDO is a block development officer. Then he said, "Nahi, sir, quota hota hai 3 ka suspension." हमने कोटे से क्या मतलब? बोले हर मीटिंग के बाद हम 3 अधिकारी सस्पेंड करते हैं. आज सस्पेंड कर दी. हमने कहा ये कोई तरीका है. हमने कहा चार्ज क्या है? बोले चार्ज आप खुद ढूंढ लीजिए. तो हमने कहा यार this is not done. And this was a crazy period in UP. I tell you, I was so distraught. I became a kavi at that point in time. Maybe sometime I'll narrate that to you. But I was shocked. So the chief minister was legitimately authorized to do it, but there was no reason why should he be suspended. So next day I met the principal secretary chief minister and I told him, "Sir, I won't be able to suspend these officers. My conscience doesn't allow me. So I would like to be transferred." Now, this was one of the rare occasions when I sought a transfer. Sure enough, by the evening, I was transferred out to another place. Now here, I did disagree with him. I sought a transfer, I got it. but I never had displayed it as a shield or as a trophy that I was transferred out. And sure enough, very surprisingly, I was very surprised. Those 3 officers were ultimately not suspended. The chief minister made a remark कि आपके अधिकारी protect करते हैं और suspend नहीं करते. But I was not bothered. I was not. I mean, some people asked me, you should have stayed back, fought it out, got to it. And that's a choice that I made at that point in time. So, and so on and so forth. Again, as education secretary, at some point in time, the minister did not agree with me. An IS officer, a senior IS officer had to resign. So it happens. I mean, you can't take it to your heart. Yes, I felt bad at that point in time, but that's how life is. You win some, you lose some.
I think we have an interesting question, and I don't think I've pondered on this sufficiently as well. There's all these global events happening: China, Russia, this, that, etc. And obviously, we are every year or 2 years going through a foreign policy redo at times. Presidents change in the U.S. Our connections with China, Southeast Asia, trade agreements, Europe. Incidents happen that cause to change it. What level of so I'm trying to phrase this correctly. What level of interference or hold or systems do foreign governments manage to get in the highest levels of India, either at state or cabinet level? On one hand, you have lots of conspiracy theorists who have that, so and so country has a dossier on every major secretary and civil servant and all their antics and activities, and they are being used to actively blackmail them. And because of their ethical issues in life, they have to follow these edicts of these people. Defense also, it comes in. On the other hand, you have people on the other side who are saying that, look, foreign governments, spying though happens in every country, but there is no such thing where Indian IAS officers or politicians are specifically targeted to that level. I know there was very recently an article in a newspaper which was midway level, that there was a company which was trying to sell software to the Chinese government, which was at least tracking and creating public profiles of every major Indian author. So in your sort of sense, I mean, obviously, you weren't part of the RAW or the NSA or on in that, but having been in the highest levels of the government, what level of foreign interference do you feel is there? Or how far in this conspiracy are we? Are we on the complete edge on that side, or are we more on the...
I may not be the right person, but I can tell you from my personal experience. I probably must have been one of the few secretaries who remained secretary to Government of India for around 4 years. And before that, I held a very sensitive assignment in the Cabinet Secretariat for a year and a half. So in these 5.5 years, not a single iota of, or not a single instances where I felt the pressure of an outside power. No reference, nothing. And coal was a very sensitive sector. Many people involved. Project monitoring group where international projects were also involved. Not once did anyone call me or ring me up or message me. Never from a foreign angle. So there may be one stray exception somewhere that becomes a news. And we've had some of the finest officers as defense secretaries. I don't think any officer would come into that. I don't think so.
So I mean,
so
I think so. So there might be individual cases of personal corruption where there was a business deal or a tender, but there is no such thing like large scale interference or intelligence
I think
run by a foreign.
That's another probably reason why we try and fish out for our inefficiencies. We should do what we ought to do. I don't think foreigners are too interested in what we are doing.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, you have US, which always talks about foreign interference and spies and all of this. So I think the question was whether, because there's certain sensitive sectors, telecom, defense, even for example, coal, where you have a lot of international foreign interests, which are more strategic than just making money.
Yeah.
And there was a thought that, by due to certain people in the government being corrupt, they are susceptible to be blackmailed.
No, one thing good about at least the present government, I can say that you can't have a corrupt person as Secretary Government of India. I mean, I'm not commenting on other things, but this I can say for sure. I can vouch for almost every secretary
So
government.
we have a question on that. So I quote the question. This government has sort of made it its a blueprint that they are not corrupt, etc. There, and they will reduce corruption. But you would agree with that the current government, at least at the highest levels,
No,
they
I
have
would.
managed to succeed that.
The situation was so bad before this government came to power that compared to that, I think we are much, much better off. Beyond it, I would not like to comment.
So, in comparison to history, this is better.
Certainly.
Whether it is
Absolutely no doubt.
whether
Absolutely.
it is the perfect state that we'd like it to be, not yet, but certainly we have at least
Certainly.
come a bit further. One more question on a similar line. There is a perception that as an intergenerational change that is happening in IAS, corruption is increasing at the lower levels. And a lot of young people are entering the IS primarily not with a view to serve society, but to make money, get power, to enrich themselves. And they are not eyeing the seventh pay commission salaries, or the nice bungalow or car and all they get. They are looking to make a generational level of wealth by adopting these posts. Is that true, or is that overstated?
It is certainly overstated. I mean, I've had the occasion to interact intensively with all levels of officers, fortunately. And I find them, I derive a lot of energy when I interact with these guys. Very enthusiastic, want to do things. There would be as many corrupt IS officers as there would be, say, 50 years ago. Opportunities may be more, so the actual quantum may be more or less, but it's very difficult for me to say. But I'm very fascinated with the younger generation. Actually, they want to do things. And that's why I keep talking about mentoring. They get lost as they go along. Can we sustain their enthusiasm? Can we sustain their energy? That's where mentorship comes in. Just to tell them that you will enjoy doing this because there are people who've enjoyed doing what you're doing. So it would be wrong to say that, again, it's pure perception because no research or any data is available on that. But I would refuse to believe that the generation now is more corrupt than it was earlier. The chief secretary who went behind the bars belonged to a batch in the 60s and early 70s. So what do you say?
Supposedly the golden age of
So
IAS,
I
right?
see. They went behind the bars. Those are senior officers from the IS. So it would be wrong to say. I mean, I would not like to make that comparison. Corruption is bad, whether it's less or more, it doesn't really matter, and that's a very subjective judgment whether it's more or less. Today the advantage that we have today, unlike say 50 years ago, was today you have tools to correct it much more through the use of technology.
We have a couple of people who have asked this question. There is a tendency for young people and young, very intelligent young people to try to go for civil services rather than actually becoming politicians. Is it because one and this is to this wonderful book Poor Economics by our two Nobel laureates, Abhishek ji and Esther ji, on people viewing the large swaths of India viewing education and viewing IS as a lottery. You clear the exam, you won. You don't clear the exam, it's a 1-0 versus a politician's journey, which is a much longer journey. But do you really see that as the reason that why young people more try to go for the IS rather than become a politician? Because it's either you're in or you're out. It's not a lifetime of having to work hard and then you don't know when you end
The
up.
the attributes required of a politician are very different from the attributes of a civil servant. So people have asked me also, why don't you join politics? You are fairly articulate, you can impress people. I mean, they tell me that. But I know my limitations. So the attributes that you require for becoming a politician is totally different. It's not just a choice. Many of the civil servants would fail as politicians, and some civil servants have become politicians par excellence. So the attributes required are totally different. If you have those attributes and if you are able to assess your attributes correctly, join politics. And of course, the risk factor is much more in politics than in the civil service. That, of course, is a
In civil
determining factor.
service, you get a very quick answer, either you're in or you're out. Politician sort of takes
Absolutely.
a long
You have to
time.
keep fighting. You have to keep fighting.
And thank you, someone has actually used their name rather than all the anonymous messages. Apurv Srivastav has asked, so you worked with so many different politicians. Has there ever been a politician while working, if you were very much inspired by their style of working?
There are 4 chapters in my book, Kalyan Singh. 4 chapters about Kalyan Singh. I mean, it was a pleasure working with him. The guy, some of the incidents that I met, I learned from him that if as a politician he can be what he is. I'm civil servant. I'm so much secure. He's insecure. He's behaving in that manner. Why shouldn't I be behaving in that manner? It's truly inspiring. And
Actually,
I've
just for
mentioned
the
that.
audience, because I know some people are young here, Kalyan Singh ji was the CM of UP. Go ahead.
So I'm not only Kalyan Singh. I mean, I got inspiration from a number of politicians. Any individual has its both pluses and minuses. It's a question of where am I looking at. So, for example, I learned a lot from Mr. Oscar Fernandez. I learned a lot from Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge. I learned a lot from Mr. Prakash Javadekar, a very solid, mature politician. I may have disagreed with these gentlemen on a number of occasions, but that's a different matter. But some of them were truly inspiring. And they could look at the larger vision than I could as a civil servant. And they could convey that beautifully to me. So there were some very fine politicians that I had the occasion to work with.
Hey, so a corollary question to that, we have very fine IS officers, we have very fine politicians. Why aren't these people generally rising to the top? Why do we get a muck? Why isn't the system engineered that, okay, inefficient, corrupt, all these sort of both IS officers and politicians, they only go so far, but, they don't really rise to very high. They're sort of left downstream or even better thrown out. Why have we designed a system to allow for this?
No, there are a large number of IS officers who've risen to the top and been absolutely wonderful.
No, of course, but
large
why
number of
have a lot of inefficient people, in your own words, sort of managed to rise to the top? Why
so
is this allowing that?
that's how the world is made up. It takes all types to make this world, and we allow it to happen. And that is why you have people both good, bad, and ugly in any system, businesses, bureaucracy. That's why I keep saying none of us lives in an ajaib ghar or zoo. We are a part of this social system. We evolved that way. We see people ask me, "Ye dekhe, bada, he's very brash," because we must understand we are feudal. I curse others not because I curse him because I don't have that privilege. The moment I have that chance of that privilege, I'll have that. There's so many occasions where I found, and one incident which probably is not there in my book, there was a young boy who used to work with me when I just joined the service. He used to curse the policeman, curse them, day in and day out. Marte hain, vasuli karte hain. After 6 months, there was a recruitment of policemen going on, constables. He comes and tells me, "Sir, meri sifarish kar dijiye, main policeman banna chahta hu." Maine kal tak to tum gali dete the. So his gali was not tuned toward the wrongs of policemen. Usko loot ka, he wanted to participate in that loot. So it's our cultural ethos. It is changing. It's not that it's not changing. It will change over a period of time. That feudal mindset that was there when I joined the service has changed quite substantially. The civil servants have started behaving differently, but it will take time. Took 2 centuries for them to become that. Probably it'll take another 45, 50 years. Much more informed public, informed media probably will bring about that change.
Would you make it easier for civil servants to be fired for non-performance? Because I think one of the pushback that a lot of good IS officers also give is that, there's a very fine line for being pushed out due to political reasons. And if you make it easy to fire an officer, then you will have a rampant amount of, you would have a political takeover of the IS because they would be able to fire anybody left, right, and center. So they would have to toe the line. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who are saying that, in the history of the IS, apart from the few examples of people who are caught or jailed or thrown, even the worst officers, and everybody knows who they are, just keep getting transferred. Nobody wants to take the time, trouble, or mechanism to formally, fold their hands and say, "Sir, please leave."
I would love to have that mechanism. To me, mechanism and the process is very important. If you leave it to the processes that are there now, you can just forget serving. I mean, even now there is a bit of a problem. You're under enormous pressure now. You can be harassed, no end. Officers are arrested for no fault. Not now. I mean, I saw it in my own state. So if you allow that to happen in the present dispensation, there'll be chaos. I'm all for it. But you have to have a system. Again, in my book, not in this context, in another context, I've I mean, that article should appear soon also again. That article is titled Falling for Crumbs. Now, what is happening for post-retirement jobs? So if the choice is for servile and pliable and not for honest and efficient, how do you ensure that happens? It can be done. My suggestion in my book is set up an institution like UPSC, which shortlists officers on the basis of their efficiency and integrity, and then let the politician pick up one from those three. But don't allow them to run riot, to have anybody who's, and the tragedy is, in a recent article I had written, you find an officer appropriate at some point in time and suddenly you dump him. So the guy who's recommended his name should also be dumped along with him. How can an officer become inefficient and corrupt suddenly? Just because you want to dump him. So these are the vagaries of administration. It can be handled, provided there is a political will, because ultimate decision maker is the politician. If I want an honest functioning, let me convey a message, and I'm being blunt here, that a Supreme Court judge who held a press conference against Chief Justice of India, against whom sexual harassment case was made, is not made member of parliament. If you do that, what signal are you sending to the civil service or to the judges? That's the problem that we have. You allow that to happen, you'll have every day the such problems coming before you.
Yes, I'm looking for now a long answer here, Chi. So please free to take your time. We have all in the thing because a large number of people have asked this. If you were to name 5 to 6 reforms that you would have liked to see implemented in the bureaucracy in the IS to truly unlock the potential, because no matter what accusation of corruption or inefficiency, etc., these are the smartest people our country has to offer. Absolutely the smartest, and particularly the younger generation now have the Ivy League credentials also to back up that level of smartest. I've never seen a more educated civil service in the history of India than I'm seeing now in the last 5 to 10 years. What are the 5-10 reforms, G? And please elaborate, because this is something that we really want to listen to.
So I have mentioned some in the beginning, but let me go sequentially on how do you reform. I'm now talking of the Indian Administrative Service. First, the recruitment system has to undergo a change. The existing recruitment systems, though absolutely above board, does not select leaders. The selection process should select leaders through UPSC through a variety of tools that are now available. Earlier, they were not available. So you can have things like group discussions. It will take a lot more time than what you're doing now. It will be a lot more subjective, but it needs to be done to assess the leadership qualities in individual before selecting. That's step one. Step two would be, when he goes for training, you hone leadership skills, skills of skills of motivating, skills of group activity, skills of communication. These are skills that will enable him to evolve as a better leader. Skills of sacrifice, skills of attitude of supporting your subordinate. These are things that are required of a leader. So in your training, you must have case studies through which you demonstrate that guys who had leadership qualities managed to deliver things which others were not able to do. I don't think you should be teaching constitution to them or Indian penal code. They can learn on their own. They're pretty smart. They can learn law, but you're taught law. Why should you be taught law? As I keep saying, expertise can be outsourced, attitude cannot. That attitude change to be amended. The recruitment age will have to come down, because as my joint director at some point in time used to say, if you recruit a person at 35 years, he's a hard-boiled egg. You can't change him. If you want to change this guy, nothing beyond 26 years. Now, many people have opposed this, but that's how it is. If you want to change a person, you have to catch him young. So recruitment process has to undergo a change. Training has to undergo a change. Third, you must have an institutional mechanism of mentoring the officers. If you don't have that, we will lose these officers. We are losing these officers. I've seen officers getting lost because they don't know who to go, where to go. They are being hit left, right, and center. I'll give you, since you asked me to elaborate, let me give you an example. Here was an officer posted as sub-divisional magistrate Muzaffarnagar. This I'm talking of last year. He rings me up at 8 o'clock in the night. Sir, आपसे बहुत जरूरी बात करनी है. So I said, बताओ. नहीं सर, आके बात करेंगे. Now he's calling from Muzaffarnagar. मैंने कहा कब आओगे? बोले सर मैं अभी आ सकता हूँ. मैंने कहा आ जाओ. So I stay in Noida. He drove for 3 hours from Muzaffarnagar, came to my house at 11 o'clock in the night. And what did he have to say? Sir, I have been advised not to stop gundas from going into villages and shouting communal slogans. What should I do? And he was fairly agitated because he was stopping them. He said it will lead to communal riots. So I said, what does your conscience say? He said, sir, रुकना होगा. हमने कहा रुको. मैंने कहा, are you aware of the consequences? बोले सर ट्रांसफर हो जाएगा. हमने कहा, are you afraid of transfer? Well, नहीं sir, my wife is posted elsewhere, so I have no problem. I said, then you have no problem. Go ahead and do what you feel like. Sure enough, within 48 hours, he was transferred out. Then he rings me up after a month. Now look at what he does. सर आपने बहुत सही कहा था. अब मैं वहां से यहाँ आ गया हूँ. यहाँ सब जानते हैं कि गड़बड़ करेंगे तो एसडीएम साहब मारेंगे, छोड़ेंगे नहीं. Now look at the discovery that this man had about himself. He would have been lost. So that's what mentoring is for you. Now, since people have access to me, they are able to talk to me. It's an informal arrangement. I do that. And this one such incident. The fourth part is, what do you do to people when they join the service? That's the fourth reform. Who are you seen as rewarding? Who are being shown as being rewarded? Are you rewarding the pliable, the spineless, and the people who do your bidding, whatever you want to do? Or you are empowering or showing to others that efficiency and honesty is being rewarded? If this signal, because government works through signal. Mind you, I've written an article. What happened in Hathras was not an incident. It was a signal that the government is giving, that you can get away with blue murder. Can you get away with blue murder? Sarkar Iqbal se chalti hai. Now, what is the message that the government gives? So that's the fourth. So Supreme Court has said it in the context of police officers that there has to be a board which would clarify who should go where. There has to be some independence. Now, first three things that I said were possible. This will be politically very difficult. Then there would be, you must have some sort of a transfer policy. I'm not saying transfer is a punishment. My view is very different. My view is, if someone is bad, let him not destroy 6 institutions. Either you chuck him out of the service or allow him to destroy only one. Why? Because he can destroy an institution in 3 months. He can't build an institution. And secondly, if he stays in a place and destroys it for 3 years, you will be able to fix responsibility. Otherwise, he'll say, "मैं तो 3 ही महीने था, पिछले वाले ने गड़बड़ किया." So you have to have clear transfer policy. So if you take these 5 steps, and these are not rocket science, this is eminently possible. And I saw that happen. I remember Kalyan Singh ji. I remember, there is a chapter in my book, and this will just help you understand why I'm a great admirer. Transfers of district magistrates were to happen, and the chief secretary was there. I was, by sheer chance, I was not supposed to be there. I asked him, "Sir, should I go?" He said, "Nahi, aap rukiye." By which time probably he had some confidence in me. So chief secretary started proposing the name of officers, and he kept mentioning their caste along with the officer. So the chief minister looked towards him. He said, "मैंने तो आपसे सिर्फ ये कहा था कि जो ईमानदार और अच्छे अधिकारी हैं वो बताइए, आप ये क्या बता रहे हैं मुझे उनकी कास्ट?" In those days, caste was a factor in determining the posting of district magistrate, and here was a politician teaching a civil servant, get above caste. So it is not that it can't be done. You know, those 2 years of Kalyan Singh on 1991, 92 were considered to be the golden period of this state. Cheating, copying in the class, that's another chapter in my book, was stopped. Transfer and postings became totally transparent based on parameters. He demonstrated it can be done. So I am a great optimist. I believe things can be done because they have been done. People have to get down and do it.
Anilji, so we have a couple of prime minister aspirants in the audience, apparently. So a couple of questions have come on that. These are gentlemen who feel that they want to join the political career, and their aspiration is to eventually become the Prime Minister of India. I'm clubbing 2-3 questions into one, so I'll paraphrase again. You have seen now politicians at every level, down from the MLA all the way. You work now with 2 prime ministers directly, and of course, multiple through the service. What is, apart from luck, there have been some prime ministers who become prime ministers out of sheer luck. But what are the qualities that you have seen in politicians which allow them to actually rise above, or just end up being just another MLA or MP? What is the quality that they need to have to actually rise to the point where they can become prime minister?
I never had any aspiration to become a prime minister, nor have I looked at prime ministers in this manner. But this country has been fortunate to have very fine prime ministers. I mean, each individual has his problems. But if you go through since independence, all prime ministers, barring a few accidental prime ministers have been people, men of substance and women of substance. So one is become a person of substance. Only Hawa Hawai will not work. You have to understand the ground reality very clearly, which I admired in a number of prime ministers, some as a student and then in the service. I had the occasion to have a very detailed interaction with Atal Bihari Vajpayee also at some point in time. I was in fact traveling in an official capacity in a state plane along with him, just the two of us. So I got to know more of him. Absolutely amazing person. So you have to evolve as an individual who's grounded, very grounded, yet a person who had a vision. You have to have a vision. All the prime ministers that I interacted with had a vision. I mean, they were visionaries. Again, as I keep saying, everyone has his problems. I mean, I have been critical of some prime ministers in my book, but fact of the matter is, fundamentally, they were grounded and they had a vision. Then they were all sharp. They were all very sharp. Some may not appear to be sharp, but their perception levels they were on the uptake like this. They didn't take very long to understand what was going on. The antennas were great. They understood the implications of what was being told to them. Not many of us have that. And sometimes I used to be very surprised at the response because probably I never thought of that version of what I was saying. So you have to have these qualities. And of course, you have to have enormous amount of grit, perseverance, and sense of sacrifice as well.
The only thing else I would add to the list of Anil, which Anilji has said, which is very difficult to do it. I've been fortunate to have met several prime ministers and not interacted with them in the depth Anilji has. But one of the things, at least I found, they are the most charismatic people in the room normally. And whether that is acquired over years of hardship and political and this, but if you meet, the prime minister, let's, for example, Atalji, standing in a list of dignitaries and all, he would shine like a torch.
Halo, yes.
It was
Halo around them. Yeah.
absolutely impossible to ignore that personal drive and charisma, and that comes through perseverance. He had done that very similar with Dr. Manmohan Singh, even though he was much quieter. And of course, Prime Minister Modi has taken that to another level. But I think part of the answer is, as Sir said, is that having that quick uptake, being there, but also that personal perseverance and charisma. There is a reason why Indian prime ministers are very old compared to every other country. It takes a long many years to get these traits that Anilji has said. You have to have a whole litany of experiences on the ground and in visionary circumstances to do it. Gee, I have a couple of questions on UP today. You have sort of seen UP in its good days. You've seen it in its worst days, perhaps. And you can always argue which years were better or which years were worse. How are you seeing the state develop today? We have a chief minister who is very proactive. He has gone against the grain. During COVID-19, for example, how he stepped up to even tell that we will set up embassies of UP everywhere to help our people. He has gone, and this is a question from a gentleman, he has gone above and beyond what you expect from a CM at a national stage. uh, how are you seeing UP today? What has improved? What is still something that needs to be improved as a state?
UP has enormous potential now because of the political mandate that the chief minister has. And he has taken some remarkable steps. In education, I've been very appreciative of things that he's been able to do, which other states are still struggling with. Coming up with the legislation for fee control, stopping copying, phenomenal steps. And the steps they are taking in terms of industrialization. But what I find a bit disturbing is the manner in which communal issues are being tackled. That is very disturbing. The social hiatus that is getting created is very, very disturbing. until unless the law and order and this part of the aspect gets taken care of, then rest of it will not get to be seen. What is will be noted are the hathrases and the unnaus that happen rather than the development that is happening. And that can be done. That can be done by sending the right signal, not allowing people to get away with blue murder when it is indeed everyone knows is a blue murder. How about taking, I mean, I keep saying, if you allow the local civil servant to take hold of law and order, that should not be a political issue. If the civil servant on the spot is not looking over his shoulder to seek guidance politically to handle a law and order situation, then the situation will improve. But if the civil servant on the spot keeps looking over his shoulder to seek guidance on law and order issues, then there is trouble. I see that happening in UP, which disturbs me, that why should a civil servant be looking over his shoulder to seek guidance on law and order issue? Law and order issue is the mandate of the officer on the spot. He should be allowed to handle that himself.
We have an interesting question, Ji, on that. We had the creation of Uttarakhand that happened, right? UP today is still perhaps India's largest state by population, I think. Huge, massive land and territory. In fact, the size of UP, very few countries in the world can even compare. I think it is ranked number 5 or number 6 as a country in terms of population, land, density, all this stuff. Uh, Several chief ministers, for various reasons, have given proposals of breaking up UP into smaller states, particularly along the lines, what happens in Gorakhpur, for example, is very different from what is Noida, very different from eastern, western, northern, southern UP. They're not recognizable, right? Do you think that is a valid proportion, both in terms of from a business perspective? Because one of the criticisms that at least from the business side we see continuously in UP is that you have policies made for Noida which are being implemented in Lucknow or Allahabad, or policies made for another part of UP being implemented elsewhere, and that is causing the development of the state to pause because you need specific policies for specific areas rather than a policy that governs the entire state. Is that a good idea? Do you think it's possible?
I have been always of the view that UP is too big to be governed from Lucknow. It needs to be split further, for very simple reasons, that the regions are very, very different in nature. As you said, Eastern UP, Southern UP, Western UP, Central UP, they are all very different, very distinct. That is one. Number two, barring the exception of Jharkhand, which on account of political reasons it could not develop, and that's another chapter in my book. Wherever there has been a split in the states have developed. Look at since independence, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Gujarat to begin with. Gujarat flourished when it came out of the.
And by the way, most of our viewers don't realize this, but Gujarat was removed from state of Bombay. It's not really covered very well in our history books, but go on, Ji.
Chhattisgarh, look at what Chhattisgarh has happened in Chhattisgarh. So every state, even Uttarakhand has better parameters than UP now, and then what it was earlier. So bifurcation or trifurcation of the state is called for in UP. Politically, it may be difficult, but I would suggest purely from development point of view, it needs to be, an administration point of view, it needs to be split.
Another one question, and this is something I know you've answered before in another webinar, but I'll still ask it. Why does UP become famous for corruption? Is it UP uniquely dysfunctional versus other states?
I did a bit of analysis on this, and I found that the corruption in some of the states is much worse than in UP. But UP gets to be known because for its proximity to Delhi. So crossing the Yamuna is like being a part of Delhi, so it gets to be known much more.
Secondly, news organizations are in Noida.
Yes. So
that doesn't
and a lot of corruption that happened in Noida at some point in time was held to be happening in UP, which indeed it was happening in UP because Noida is part of UP. So it's not that UP is very unique in terms of, and second, and this is of a greater concern, the corruption in UP is more at the cutting edge level. where the common man gets impacted. That's where Tehsil or Thana, that's where the real problem is, which has been by and large taken care of in many other states. So the common man suffers a lot. I don't think there is corruption even in Japan and other big countries, but their
Everywhere.
corruption is not hitting the common man directly. It is when the corruption hits the common man that it makes more noise gets created and everyone suffers. So inherently everyone would know that now it's from Nazrana to Shukrana, now it's Jabrana, and Jabrana continues in UP to a
And
certain
you
extent.
will have to explain those three words for our audience. They are the
Okay,
same words.
Nazrana was something which you would offer to God or Maharaja Akbar without any favor from him, but in anticipation of some favor at some point in time. Upar wale ko bhi aap prasad chadhate na. That is Nazrana. Shukrana is when you ask somebody to do some work and he's done your work and you pay him, acha bhai, bahut acha kaam kiya aapne. Jabrana is wasuli. Jabrana is whether you do his work or not, you have a hafta and you take it from him. So
Balji, so here's a question. This is something which we hear often in the chambers of commerce. Is, when you are comparing notes with other countries, there is a sense, particularly, and I take China as an example, or a few. Well, let me not name the other countries because they have their own issues there. But let's even some parts of Africa. There is a tendency where, and these are for large business peoples and very private. Their perception of these countries are that yes, there is as much corruption there as in India. It's not that these countries are less corrupt, or even Europe's in some states, etc. But there is a performance-based corruption. You're setting up a project of 1,000 crores. Upfront, 5%, 3% has to be saved for there, and that is paid easily without any tax or judicial terrorism, well received, and only asked for if the work gets done. They're not they're again, I hesitate to do this on a public call, but in certain countries stock options are given to very in full knowledge of everybody. They are given to people ki bhai, we will only pay you X amount if our profitability is X amount. So they are also interested in helping your company. Now, of course, that type of corruption creates new problems. There are a couple of countries which have become the lack of competition there, or even districts in those countries, are problematic, because then the bureaucrats ensure that only this company survives, everybody else is gone. But why did that that pay for performance has happened in other countries, but in India this extortion system seems to have taken off in the last 30 years?
I don't think it is uniform in the country. I mean, my friends and your friends tell me that in Gujarat, it is already operational. There is no extortion. It's pay for performance. UP gets a bad name because we still not graduated to pay for performance. Maybe a lot of it is Jabrana. So it's not uniform through the country. The corruption systems are different at different places. There's been so much discussion on corruption. If there was so much action on corruption, probably we would have eliminated it. And I have always offered my services to whoever wants, and I'm helping it in some of the cases, where how first understand the nature and the cause of the corruption, and then try and handle it. Some corruption could be because of scarcity, as was the case in coal. The moment coal became sufficiently available, the mara-mari for coal blocks went away. So that is the reason. The other could be because of monopoly of certain institutions, government and non-government, there is corruption. The third could be on account of delays that happen in the government, where technology can play a role. So if we analyze each situation, we will understand the why of a corruption, and we'll be able to find a solution. But in most of the seminars and debates, there are generic discussions, because that's what hits the headlines, and nothing happens to corruption. Corruption can be handled, should be handled, perhaps will be handled in the country, once people realize that we have to segregate all the aspects of corruption, understand each aspect very clearly, and work on a solution with technology for that particular aspect. I mean, I can give examples after examples of how it can be done in each of these segments.
We had a huge, and this is another question, I thought it was a very nice one. we've had a number of initiatives in the past 15 years against corruption. We have the Lokpals and this and all of that stuff. What happened to them? No one hears about them anymore.
Lokpal, I still wonder how is Lokpal an initiative for stopping corruption? I'm convinced. I mean, I wish they had done some analysis of Lokayukt before setting up Lokpal. Has Lokayukt brought down corruption?
So what have they even done, Ji? I'm asking a
No,
very honest
no,
question because
I'm also trying to wonder. The tragedy. I recently wrote an article that we should evaluate institutions once they are set up. We don't. We evaluate schemes, but we don't evaluate institutions. So Lokayuks were never evaluated. Lokpal is not being evaluated because benchmarking ही नहीं है. तो evaluate क्या करेंगे? Supreme Court is never evaluated because they don't allow anybody to enter. So institutions don't get evaluated. Politicians do. They have to go to the hustings every 5 years. But institutions don't. So the initiatives taken for so-called removing corruption should be evaluated whether they impacted or not, and then you should see where impact has come. So, for example, in railways, in railway reservation, if you do an evaluation, you will understand that the corruption has come down substantially through use of technology. So, can we have lessons from that and understand the processes and the cause of corruption and then try and nail them through use of technology? But if you do that, it won't be a headline. There would be no television discussion if you don't have Lokpals. There will be a TV discussion. Anna Hazare will spend 2-3 days in Delhi. He will give interviews. There will be news item, and then Lokpal will come. And no one today talks about the impact of Lokpal on corruption. They have taken more than a year to set their rules. Someone should ask Lokpal as to what have you done. Not to say some very bright, brilliant officers there, but institutionally it can't do it. I am convinced that hounding individuals will not reduce corruption. You have to put in place systems. If the person is smart enough, he'll go to London and then he'll fight cases there. But if he's not smart, he will get caught here. So the tragedy is that we are so obsessed with headlines. We are so obsessed with making news that we don't go to the brass tacks. Corruption can be handled and should be handled through understanding processes, understanding the why of that nature of corruption, not generally discussing corruption. So if there is a corruption in the clearance of a particular file, let's try and understand how it happens. Understand the nitty-gritty. उसमें make in India नहीं होगा ना, उसमें शेर भी नहीं दहाड़ेगा, तो कौन बात करेगा उसकी? Artificial intelligence की बात नहीं होगी. So until unless we get over this whole obsession with make in India, the tiger, the lion, or whatever it is, and the artificial intelligence, we'll never do it. और आपको बताते रहेंगे वो देखिए इतना हो गया. And we, since allow us to be fooled, we'll never go into the data and never question it.
Okay, so one thing which I want to see, one of the big things that I think has been, which a full credit to the current Modi government is at least they have started making things like ease of doing business ranking, although which is very imperfect because
I'm totally against it. I'm totally against this.
Because one gentleman told me, which I thought was very nice, this is not ease of doing business, this is ease of starting to do business. We should have a ease of continuing to do business ranking, which are very different. But at least there is some thought that we are going to be held externally accountable. It's not just our figures, somebody else is at least trying to do some sort of ranking system. But one of the problems which companies face currently in India, and I'll give you an example compared to the US, compared to India, and I would love to get your thoughts on why this is there and etc. Ranging from the Companies Act to any of the acts that govern business or auditors or way bank loans, all of these are. These seem to be designed in a manner to ensure that the maximum number of companies are non-compliant, create the most strange regulations on earth. When if you benchmark them to any sane country, I would say on these matters, whether it's US, Singapore, pick up any benchmark country and ask them, what is your company's act? What regulations your companies have to follow? What reporting you have to do? What do you define as good governance? It is the comparisons are shocking. And, a lot of young entrepreneurs, one of the biggest things they suddenly realized is that, all this talk about good governance and all, and we are going to come out with this new act, which will make companies more accountable to people and all of this is actually just creating new opportunities for corruption. As you said, you have to create systems But a lot of times the systems the government is creating, particularly for industry and perhaps internally, are actually, they say it's to create efficiencies, but it's actually creating more room for a corruption, because you're creating all sorts of strange regulations. And
So
then
let us try and
how does it
understand why is
happen?
it happening.
Yeah,
I agree with you, but let us understand why is it happening and how it can be corrected. That's the bottom line. No? The prime minister can only direct and guide you to do something. Someone else will have to sit down. You don't expect the prime minister to work out the nitty-gritties of it.
absolutely.
What prime minister can and should do is get people who know how to do it. That could be an issue there. Look at insurance. Look at farm crop insurance. I don't want to go into the details of it. He asked me, I gave him a solution, and solution was presented. I don't think the paper has reached the prime minister. What do you do? See, the point is, the prime minister has to clearly understand who can deliver. That's it. Now, if you have only people shouting from rooftops, make in India, do you think India will be made? You must understand clearly, if a particular process is good in Singapore, who stops me from talking with that chap? Don't go to Singapore, go to Davos. Why don't you sit with him and find out? आप Davos जाते हैं, हम बात करने के लिए जाते हैं. आप बैठ जाइए ना सिंगापुर वाले के साथ. You understand, there is so much to learn, because again, this requires brass tacks. When I say, what really needs to be done is to understand how did coal succeed in 2 years and why did power fail. First of all, you have to admit that power sector failed. And what have you done to officials who were handling power at that point in time when power sector failed? Where are they sitting just now? What is the signal that the government is giving? Then try and understand how and why did coal sector happen? Can that be replicated? Try and understand power succeeded totally, power sector in Gujarat. Why wasn't it replicated in Rajasthan when the governments were the same? I am on record to write it to the minister at that point in time. Why can't people from Rajasthan go to Gujarat and replicate what is happening in Gujarat? But if everything is going to happen in Delhi, then it won't happen. The Uday one failed, but we don't expect that failure. So first, we must accept something that has failed. Everyone fails, accept that failure. Then try and understand why did it fail. And also see parallelly, why did Swachh Bharat happen and why is urban Swachh Bharat not happening? No one wants to talk about it because these are holy cows, no? Unless we accept the fact on the ground, we can't improve. There have been enormous successes in this government, I'm telling you. It's unprecedented. But the tragedy is we don't learn from those successes. And if we start painting failures as successful, then there is a problem. If you say Make in India has happened, you will never improve on Make in India. You must accept the fact that Make in India substantially failed. Once you do that, you start improving upon it. You must understand how did Swachh Bharat happen in rural areas and why has Swachh Bharat not done so well in urban areas? Let's try and understand it. You have to accept it. So the tragedy of our existence is that we try and hide the failures, whereas successes have been phenomenal. Some of these steps taken by Mr. Modi have been absolutely phenomenal. Setting of group of secretaries to push them to out of those silos is an absolutely amazing step. Because we did get out of silos, we did it. But the tragedy is you have to take everything to its logical conclusion. You can't paint everything as a success when it's not a success. You can't tout it as a success. Someone has to have the courage to accept a failure and then sit down and see why it failed. Let's try and improve it. But if you try and paint it as a success, and I give Make in India as a classic example, where we keep shouting it has succeeded. I have friends in businesses who would refrain from making a public comment, but in private, they say, what's going on? You talk of ease of doing business. What sort of ease of doing business? The true determinant of ease of doing business is the industry. Talk to them one-on-one, talk to them confidentially, and they'll tell you. You will know I'm talking to CII people. Why can't we accept it as a fact? Why are we painting the rank given by World Bank as the rank of having improved? No, they are nobody to give me rank. My rank will be given by the consumer in this country, the industry who's sitting here. Sit with them, have a personal one-to-one discussion. It's not a question of three industrialists being happy. It's a question of whether industry is happy. If industry is happy, they will tell you. If it is not happy, don't take it otherwise. Have a discussion and see how. much of the coal block auction that we did was as a consequence of our interaction with the industry. Very open, simple interaction. Most of the work was done by them. So there are success stories. The tragedy is that we are refusing to learn from our successes, and we are refusing to admit our failures.
I think we have a few minutes left. I know we've gone over and we
I can't.
our viewers, I think we've almost 1,000 plus to have stayed through this very, very enlightening conversation. And I'm going to put a fine point on this because I think what you mentioned is very, very important. A lot of times it seems India, particularly when it comes to policy, technology, is reinventing the wheel. Certain times it has gone far beyond. For example, the technology blueprint of Aadhaar is probably something other countries should copy. We've really, at least the back-end systems, perhaps not, a lot of argument to be made on the public-facing side, but the back-end technology, I can personally attest to. Countries should learn from us how we've done it. How we have managed EVM machines despite people jumping up and down. 1.3 billion democracy to run is no joke, and we're already seeing the US elections. There are certain things our country does very well, and we are really innovative and able to execute. Our bureaucrats are now very international. They've traveled the globe, they've gone on study trips everywhere, they have attended foreign universities for things, they have an unlimited access to resources. 15, 20 years ago, when I used to interact with senior bureaucrats, the number one complaint was lack of exposure. I think in 2020, no one can claim lack of exposure. Everybody has access. Like you said, apart from the internet, they themselves now, and hats off to the government who have given them the access to go anywhere they want in the world and study and all fine. Why are we still reinventing the wheel on a lot of these things when, like, as you said, they are, one of course is perhaps laziness or lethargy, but it doesn't quite explain that why can't we just go and find the best benchmark, how they have done it, tailor it to India. No one is saying we can cut, copy, paste. That never works. The Indian context is always very different. But what stops us from adopting this? And I'll give you a small example. For me, company law is a very interesting, because it's something that is very misunderstood by almost everybody in India, when it's pretty much the number one thing that drives capitalism, that drives economies, that drives jobs. The creation of the limited liability company, how you're doing it. India's company law is so out of whack with what is considered the norm in most OECD countries, out of a desire for, I don't know, some good governance or this and that. Honestly, it's out of whack. But whenever we see the marketing of it, and particularly, for example, taxation, they cherry pick and choose benchmarks rather than saying, look, where are the countries where the maximum number of companies are registered, which are doing the maximum thing, which are considered to be hallmarks of good governance. Why are they not taking those rules? Why are they inventing new rules blindly?
If I were sitting as Secretary Company Affairs, I would do nothing. I would invite the 3 chambers or 4 chambers of commerce, constitute a committee and ask them to create a bill. Aap bana ke lao. I've done that. In coal, I didn't do anything, I'm telling you. Everything was done by the people who suffered. I said, tumhi ko suffer karna, tumhi bana ke lao. Then the discussion starts on the draft that they prepare. Abhi kya hota hai? Discussion hote hain. वो कुछ रख लेते हैं, कुछ नहीं रखते. No. I mean, I'll give you an example, slight, totally different. In education, one of the biggest problem is the fee that the private school charge. And it's been talked about all the place. All the school owners and everyone used to meet me. So I said, Fiki, arise, you sit down and draft a legislation. Can you believe it? I asked them to draft it. They drafted legislation. As Secretary Education, I put this legislation across to UP government. There was a very smart officer. I said, ye legislation bana hai, dekho. Then he sat with those people, thrashed it out, some give, take some. Finally, they come up with a legislation which is virtually a perfect legislation to everyone's convenience. You know, and you are telling me now where the shoe pinches, you correct it. If I have a problem with that, I'll tell you, this is my problem. You put it yourself in my shoes. I am not treating you as an adversary. The problem is if there's a distrust and an adversarial relationship, you can't work. That is one. Second, and I hope I'm totally wrong, sometimes you make things tough so that only select people benefit. Because they know the ropes. I am a great believer in improving private sector investment in education. I'm a great believer. We should, because the policy talks about 6%, 6% कभी आएगा नहीं पैसा यहाँ पे. तो private sector को आप पैसा बनाने दीजिए, tax कीजिए उसमें. I am of the view. Some private schools don't want it, who have already entered the compartment.
Because they
So
will
it is
face
like
competition, so they want people
it is like
outside.
1990s Bombay Club. You remember?
Yes.
Because they benefited from the license quota Raj. They didn't want opening up the economy because they benefited. So the tragedy of our existence is that जिसके लिए हमें करना है, we hardly allow him to do it for himself. I mean, today, I must tell you, there was another senior officer who rang me up. Sir, इसमें क्या करें? हमने कहा तुम्हें कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है. जिसकी प्रॉब्लम उससे को सोल्यूशन लाके दो. आप क्यों सोल्यूशन ढूंढ रहे हो? जो ताला दे वही कुंजी भी दे ना. Then you start discussing with the solution that he has given. You don't give solution. You say, मैं तो जो आता था मेरे पास, मैंने कहा मेरे को मैं इतना पढ़ा लिखा हूं नहीं, तुम बताओ solution. Then the discussion starts with the solution. And I tell you, by God's grace, in 38 years, one managed to find solution in every problem. I've yet to think of a problem as I look back because I didn't have that solution. The guy who came with the problem, I asked him solution lekar aao. And then not only discuss with them, throw it open. Today to internet hai na, aap dal do usme.
Public comment kind. No, you're right. Because
I'm telling you, I mean, I'm not boasting or anything. If you have a mindset of finding a solution to the problem, you will find one. It's the problem of attitude and mindset. And I go back to the selection system. If I am so hung up or stuck up on what I think is right, then we'll never find a solution. Let all, Rabindranath Tagore was great. And Mahatma Gandhi, aane do hawa yaar jahan se bhi aa rahi hai. Ultimate decision mujhe lena hai na. Don't be biased towards anybody. The only bias is towards the nation, towards the country, what can help. Now, suppose you come up with a solution which I think is incorrect. Let me tell you that why it is incorrect. I'm telling you, I have benefited through these discussions. Why can't? Because these discussions will not hit headlines. Actually, kya hai? When British left this country, they took justice with them. Left behind laws, in-laws and outlaws. So we think we only come up with laws like right to education, right, that destroyed education in the country. So instead of going that route, let's sit with the stakeholders. I mean, I hope some of you find time to read my book. That's the thrust. The people I'm trying to impact, I should take them on board. Without that, because ultimately I'm the decision maker. You can't force me to take a decision. But why should I deprive myself of the wisdom that you may have? And since you have the problem, probably you'll have a better solution for me. So Companies Act, if I were to do it, I'll ask the association, तुम बना के लियो यार, ना कैसा होना चाहिए लियो. आप research करो जाके सिंगापुर, मैं क्यों करूं? आपकी problem है. You'll be very happy. All industry association, whoever I interact with, are very happy. बना के ले आओ, and then go clause by clause and understand the implications. Throw it open to other stakeholders. See what happens. My experience tells me that you find something. In fact, Mr. Modi also wants it. I've had very intensive interaction with him. He's such a patient listener, I can't tell you. I must if you have time, I'll just narrate an incident to you.
Please do.
The government struggled with health insurance scheme for 3 years because they had dumped the previous health insurance scheme thanks to 3 group of secretaries who knew nothing about insurance and dumped RSBY. And they couldn't suggest any alternative. After 3 years, I wrote an article very recently. I get a call from Principal Secretary to Prime Minister. Anil, can you brief the Prime Minister on health insurance? I said, what have I to do with health insurance? Sir, I am Education Secretary. Bole, nahi yaar, we have been trying for past so many years and there is some misunderstanding there. So I said, how will I be there? Bole, aisa karte hain. Today, there is a presentation on health. I will also have presentation on education. You'll be there if the Prime Minister asks you, tell him. Chalega. Sham ko presentation hua. Health Secretary ne presentation kiya. Uska Prime Minister, we can't think of a better person as Prime Minister. What pains me is, here is a huge opportunity for us to deliver in this country. Why aren't we doing as much as he expects of us? So he asked me, Anil ji, aap bataiye, aap rahe hain. Aapki kya raay hai? So I spoke for 20 minutes. And ek tak sunte rahe. He's such a patient listener. And I was advising him, which I was warned that I should not, because earlier we had given that advice and he had got very upset. Now I'm not going to the details. It's there in my article and probably in my book also. So in the end, he says, Anil ji, aap theek hai. One joint secretary almost fell off from his chair because later on he asked me, सर आपने कैसे बोल दिया प्राइम मिनिस्टर के सामने जब आपको पता था वो नाराज? मैंने कहा देखो यार मुझे रिटायरमेंट के बाद इनसे कुछ चाहिए नहीं. I don't expect anything of him. वो जो मैंने ठीक समझा मैंने हित में समझा, इनको कह दिया नहीं अच्छा लगेगा नहीं अच्छा लगेगा मैं क्या करूंगा. And then Ayushman Bharat was announced. So what I am trying to say here is, yes, the Prime Minister does get annoyed on very rare occasions. He gets annoyed, but that's his privilege, yeah. He's a Prime Minister. If you talk
I think
stupidly,
he's working 24/7. You can't.
I mean, he's putting his heart and soul. I'm sorry to say that much of the failure is on account of us, people like us. We don't have the courage, and I've seen it. I've again written in my book. Many of us don't muster up the courage to speak what we have to speak.
Thank you so much for that. I've just been told we're a little bit out of time, but I am so grateful for this entire session. I think we've almost now done 2 hours. We've gone at least half an hour, 45 minutes over time. We still have now 57, 60 questions coming in.
So what I can suggest is, my request to you is, please convey my email ID to each one of them. Swarup8@yahoo.com. You can Swarup, SWARUP.
And we will send it out to our CII.
Yes, and I will try and respond to each one of them, because I see we must know these answers. And
they're very, very interesting questions.
Must know these answers. And my suggestion would be, much of the answers that I see here in the Q&A, the answers are there in my book. So if you do find time, read Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. Would love to have your comments on that. Perhaps you'll have a greater understanding of the answers that I've spoken about, and you'll find some of your answers.
I think that's a great way. And this is something which I would recommend to our audience. Sir has 2 books. Both of them are very, very insightful. The latest one, of course, is Ethical Dilemmas. It is not a dry thing. Just as you have seen him in this webinar, his book is exactly the same style, in-depth stories, real talk, no theoretical frameworks and such. And I think you will find answers to a lot of your questions well contained within the book. We can always email sir. He's given out his email address, and he has put it outside as well. But I really want to thank all of you for staying with us this long. We have gone on half an hour, 45 minutes over. Once again, Ji, deep gratitude to Shri Anil Swarup Ji, for spending time with us, so much time, and for being so open and candid and willing to take up any question, regardless of how sensitive or controversial it is. We rarely get speakers with us who are able to be so open. And so I think we are all very grateful, thankful, and delighted that we had this opportunity, sir.
Thank you. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you.